flu season is ramping up early. The CDC says 60% of the country has some level of flu activity, and that's unusually high for this time of year.
The Army's top germ lab was abruptly shut down.
Tonight, the CDC trying to extinguish the health emergency linked to e-cigarettes until it figures out why so many people are getting serious lung injury.
This year, even before peak season, 30 states are reporting a higher number of flu cases than at the same point last year or even for the last 10 years.
In historic Frederick, Maryland, are the biological warfare laboratories. Volunteers were a picked group to expose a person to a biological aerosol.
大家好, I'm Nathan Rich, aka 火锅大王. You know, there's been a lot of conspiracy theories going around about this COVID-19 outbreak. Some of them have to do with the military games that took place in Wuhan in October of 2019. And some other ones have to do with vaping in America. And one that may seem even more far-fetched has to do with a medical research laboratory that was closed down in America in August. But how could a military medical research center being closed down in August have anything to do with an outbreak? I mean, it's not like there was an outbreak of a mystery respiratory illness that was causing pneumonia immediately in the vicinity of that facility right before they closed it down or anything. No, there wasn't one. There were two. The Chemical and Biological Defense Unit of the Department of Defense announces bidding for a DoD Phase 1 project. It specifically mentions SARS-CoV and MERS. They're trying to develop a resistance to them. Phase 1 is to identify broadly acting small molecule inhibitors of virus infection. Some kind of a treatment that they can give to humans so that they won't be affected by these viruses. Warfare is mentioned several times, and they want to start doing lots of replication of these viruses and test their different products to prevent infection. In a nearby town in Fort Detrick, the military research facility puts out an advertisement for hiring an animal caretaker, suggesting that they have animals at this facility. In June, the CDC goes to this medical facility and they find that this facility has not been following protocols about containment. And it's exactly at this point that vaping illness, which had been around for a couple of years, suddenly starts the first and only enormous boom in cases. Now, why are we even talking about vaping illness? It's interesting for two reasons. The only enormous spike it has ever had in cases happens to go along with this entire timeline. And its symptoms are literally almost exactly the same as COVID-19. Even the lung CT scans, which are very strange, are strange in the exact same way as they are strange in COVID-19. They have a sort of a ground glass appearance inside of the lungs. It also causes pneumonia, fever, and so that's why this has come into this timeline. Since 2014, elderly people did not need to tell their doctors if they had pneumonia to get a certain kind of vaccination. But on this day, the CDC changes that and says now if you want that vaccination, you have to first tell your doctor that you have symptoms, and then they will give it to you. And we do know that the CDC monitors healthcare visits from patients. They have a very advanced system that tracks keywords, symptoms, all kinds of stuff. And here on July 1st, the Department of Defense just cancels that request for bidding. And they give no explanation as to why that happened. So this is the Department of Defense CBD. It's in Virginia. And here is Fort Detrick. It's in Maryland. So right around the time that they canceled this Phase 1 project, a mystery respiratory disease is reported in Northern Virginia. There are over 60 elderly people infected, and there are deaths, and some of them have contracted pneumonia. Wisconsin reports a vaping illness cluster. How do people form a cluster if it's non-communicable? Don't know. 2 deaths from the mystery respiratory illness reported. Here we see another advertisement for an animal caretaker at Fort Detrick. And here on the 15th of July, 2019, the CDC sends a cease and desist letter to the lab, telling them essentially to shut down most operations. Then we see another death related to this mystery respiratory disease that's causing pneumonia. And then we find another mystery respiratory illness that's causing pneumonia. That one is right here, right outside of Washington, D.C., which is the headquarters for all of these operations. On the 18th of July, the military lab is shut down. Now, what is this military lab actually doing? Even though in the past they've gotten in trouble for handling viruses that weren't in their database, you can actually find a list of those ones which are in their database. So these are the agents and toxins at Fort Detrick: swine flu, Ebola, and SARS-associated coronavirus. So it seems that they have animals there, they have a coronavirus there, and that they were shut down for failing to comply with proper containment protocols. So because we can see reports in July of over 60 people being infected, that may have happened in June. Illinois reports a cluster of vaping illness. The US CDC looks into those 2 nursing homes that aren't related to each other, that both are in the proximity of this laboratory, that both fell victim to an unexplained respiratory illness that causes pneumonia. And they declare that the cause is the common cold. By this point, the case rate has more than doubled in 1 month. On the 5th of August, this is when it was widely reported that the lab had been shut down, and the CDC says it can't release details because of, quote, national security concerns. On the 19th of August 2019, the CDC pushes for expansion of its already existing surveillance system for patients' symptoms. The NSSP is something that essentially spies on you when you're going to the hospital and telling your symptoms and that kind of stuff. Here on the 21st of August, it's announced that something called the Event 201 will take place. This is essentially a forum about what might happen in a global pandemic, focusing more on, by the way, the economic impact rather than on the loss of life. Here we see the first death attributed to vaping illness ever in the years that it's been tracked. Maryland reports that vaping pneumonia cases have doubled, and Virginia is also rising. Here, the CDC reminds the public to get flu shots. Here, the CDC reminds people not to kiss their chickens. We'll come back to that one later. And this is the earliest theorized date of the COVID-19 outbreak. Starting around October of each year, the CDC starts to track the flu season, and that begins here on the 28th of September. The next day is the peak vaping illness cases. From the day after they start tracking flus till now, the cases have inexplicably gone down. No one knows why the cases of vaping illness started to go down as soon as they started reporting on flu illness. These are Maryland, which is where the biochemical research laboratory is. So overall, the flu activity was a level 2 and the intensity was a level 1. This also includes flu-like illnesses. ILI means influenza-like illnesses. But the percent of people going to hospitals for influenza was higher than it had been in at least 4 years. And the influenza-like illness emergency visits percent was the second highest in 4 years. They do these reports weekly, and the next week it was the same. The week after that, the flu activity was level 5. And Maryland is the first state in the United States with widespread flu activity. And this is more unusual than it seems, because if we look at prior years, we can see something interesting. So this was the week before the first case was identified in China, but this is 2015. And you can see that Maryland is low activity. And this is the same week from 2016. Maryland is very low. And this is the same week from 2017. There's a lot more activity going on, but Maryland is very low. And this is the same week from 2018. There's some activity, but Maryland is very low. This is the actual week before the virus was first noticed in China, and Maryland is high activity, as well as, by the way, Virginia. In all these years, Virginia and Maryland did not have high activity at this time, but 2019, they both did. Then the Wuhan Military Games event begins. And at the same time, Event 201 in NYC happens. The next week, activity goes down a bit in America, but there's the first flu death and the first pneumonia